What happens when the most feared crime lord in the underworld finds an overworked, plus-sized maid scrubbing his fine china at 3 in the morning? He doesn't fire her. He doesn't ignore her. Instead, less than 12 hours later, he slides a multi-million-dollar diamond onto her soapy finger in front of 50 ruthless gangsters and high society snobs. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story of brutal power, hidden agendas, and a midnight encounter that changed the Mafia forever. The sprawling, ultra-modern fortress sat heavily on the shores of Medina, Washington. Behind the 20-foot wrought-iron gates and the perimeter of armed guards lay the West Coast headquarters of the most formidable syndicate in the Pacific Rim. While the organization had its roots deep in the traditional Japanese Yakuza, its current Oyabun, the supreme boss, was an anomaly. His name was Gabriel Hayes. Adopted into the syndicate as a boy by the former patriarch in Tokyo, Gabriel had ruthlessly climbed the ranks, maintaining his Western name, but adopting the cold, precise brutality of his mentors. Inside the estate, the air was thick with the scent of expensive Cuban cigars and 50-year-old Yamazaki whiskey. Upstairs in the grand dining hall, a massive banquet was taking place. It was a summit to finalize a blood-pact merger between Gabriel's syndicate and the European cartels. Far beneath the crystal chandeliers and the life-or-death negotiations in the cavernous stainless steel industrial kitchen stood Penelope Jenkins. Penelope, or Penny to the few who bothered to speak to her, was invisible. In a household where the waitstaff was meticulously selected to look like runway models, Penny was the glaring exception. She was fat. She didn't possess the waif-like figures of the hostesses who poured champagne upstairs. She was soft, curvy, and carried a physical weight that made her the prime target for the cruel, unending mockery of the head housekeeper, Abigail. "You stay out of sight, Penelope." Abigail had hissed earlier that evening, her manicured nails digging into Penelope's shoulder. "Mr. Hayes is hosting the Ashfords. They expect perfection. They expect elegance. You are here to scrape the plates and scrub the pots. If any of the guests see you waddling down the corridors, I will have you thrown out onto the street with nothing." Penelope had simply nodded, keeping her eyes glued to the pristine white tiles. She was used to it. The heavy physical labor always fell to her. She didn't mind the hard work. It paid incredibly well, and she desperately needed the money to keep her mother in a private care facility in Bellevue. But the emotional toll of being treated like a grotesque secret was beginning to crack her spirit. As the night wore on, the cart tables kept rolling into the kitchen, piled high with grease-stained Royal Copenhagen porcelain, smeared baccarat crystal glasses, and heavy silver platters. The other maids, reeking of expensive perfume and exhaustion, dumped their loads and vanished to the staff quarters, complaining about their aching feet. By 2 a.m., the kitchen was deserted, save for Penelope. The silence of the massive underground room was broken only by the steady, scalding hiss of the industrial sinks. Penelope stood over the basin, her hands pruned and raw, despite the thick yellow rubber gloves. Her oversized uniform was soaked through with soapy water, clinging to her thick thighs and wide hips. Strands of damp brown hair had escaped her messy bun, sticking to her flushed cheeks. Her back screamed in agony, a dull, throbbing ache radiating from her spine down to her calves. "Just 3 more stacks," she whispered to herself, her voice a soft, exhausted rasp. "Just 3 more stacks and you can sleep." She grabbed a heavy cast-iron pan used for searing Kobe beef, her plump arms straining as she scrubbed fiercely at the burnt fat. She didn't harbor illusions of a better life. She knew the reality of the world she lived in. It was a world built on power aesthetics and ruthlessness. A fat girl from the wrong side of the tracks, buried in the basement of a Mafia kingpin's mansion, was meant to stay buried. But destiny, as it often does, had a twisted sense of humor. Gabriel Hayes could not sleep. His sprawling master suite, with its panoramic view of Lake Washington, felt like a beautifully decorated cage. The summit upstairs had been a success on paper, but the undercurrents of betrayal were palpable. Victoria Ashford, the ambitious, venomous daughter of the European cartel boss, had spent the entire evening attempting to corner him into a political marriage. It was a strategic move by her father, a way to sink their claws into Gabriel's West Coast operations. Gabriel unbuttoned his crisp Tom Ford shirt, revealing the intricate, sprawling Irizumi tattoos that covered his chest and arms, a fierce, coiled dragon amidst stormy waves, the undisputed mark of his ascension in the Japanese underworld. His head throbbed. The fake smiles, the veiled threats, the endless posturing. It was suffocating. Seeking the mindless comfort of a cold glass of water, Gabriel bypassed the minibar and decided to walk. He moved silently through the darkened, silent corridors of his mansion, a ghost haunting his own home. When he reached the grand staircase leading to the service quarters, he paused. A faint, rhythmic sound echoed up from the basement kitchen. Splash, scrub, clink. Gabriel narrowed his dark eyes. It was 3 a.m. His security detail was on the perimeter, and the staff was under strict orders to retire by 1 in the morning, unless explicitly summoned. His hand instinctively brushed the cold steel of the concealed pistol at his waist as he descended the stairs, his footsteps making zero sound on the marble. He stopped in the shadows of the kitchen doorway. There, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights, was a woman. She was not one of the identical, painfully thin hostesses Abigail usually paraded around. She was heavily built, her body soft and round, wrapped in a soaked apron. She was attacking a mountain of dishes with a relentless, exhausted determination. Gabriel watched in silence. He watched the way her shoulders slumped with fatigue, yet her hands never stopped moving. He watched a bead of sweat roll down her flushed cheek. Suddenly, she dropped a silver fork into the sink, the metallic clatter echoing loudly. Penelope let out a shaky, frustrated breath, leaning her weight against the edge of the sink. "I hate this," she whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling with unshed tears. "I am so tired. I am just so tired." Gabriel stepped out of the shadows. "Then stop!" Penelope shrieked, whirling around so fast she nearly slipped on the wet tile. Her eyes went wide with sheer terror as she took in the towering, broad-shouldered figure standing in her kitchen. She recognized him instantly from the rare glimpses she'd caught from afar. The tattoos, the cold, piercing eyes, the aura of absolute, terrifying authority. It was Gabriel Hayes, the boss. "Mr. Hayes!" Penelope stammered, her hands flying up to cover her flushed face, instantly agonizing over her soaked, disheveled appearance. She tried to curtsy, a clumsy motion that nearly made her lose her balance. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I was just trying to finish the—" "I asked you to stop," Gabriel said, his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the room. He didn't sound angry. He sounded curious. He walked slowly toward her. Penelope instinctively shrank back, pressing her ample hips against the counter, suddenly acutely aware of how much space she took up. She waited for the reprimand. She waited for him to call her a fat, useless cow just like Abigail did. Instead, Gabriel stopped 2 feet away from her. He looked at the massive pile of dishes, then down at her raw, blistered hands. "Did you do all of this alone?" he asked. Penelope swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. The other girls, they had to serve upstairs. They were tired." Gabriel's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what kind of cruel hierarchy existed in his staff, though he rarely concerned himself with it. But seeing it in front of him, seeing this genuine soft woman worked to the bone while the others slept, stirred a sudden, violent anger in his chest. "Take off the gloves," he ordered softly. "Sir, the gloves, take them off. Trembling, Penelope peeled the thick yellow rubber off her hands. Gabriel reached out. Penelope gasped as his large, calloused fingers that had ended lives and commanded empires, gently took her small, swollen hands. He traced a blister on her palm with his thumb. "You're bleeding," he noted. "It's nothing, sir," Penelope whispered, her heart hammering frantically against her ribs. No man had ever touched her with such care, certainly not a man who looked like him. "I'm used to the heavy work." Gabriel looked up, his dark eyes locking onto her wide hazel ones. He took in her full face, the soft curve of her jaw, the genuine fear and pure innocence radiating from her. In a world full of plastic faces and calculated smiles, Penelope was violently, jarringly real. "What is your name?" he asked. "Penelope, sir." "Penelope." He tasted the name. "Leave the dishes, Penelope. Go to sleep. But Abigail will fire me if—" "Abigail does not run this house," Gabriel interrupted, his tone chillingly absolute. "I do, and I am telling you to go to bed." Penelope stared at him, utterly bewildered. Slowly she nodded. As she shuffled past him, terrified and confused, Gabriel felt a strange foreign sensation settle in his chest. The suffocating pressure of the syndicate, the looming threat of the Ashfords, it all faded into the background. For the first time in years, the ruthless boss felt something akin to peace. The morning sun cast long, cold shadows across the grand foyer of the Medina estate. By 9 a.m., the main hall was packed. 50 of the most dangerous individuals on the West Coast, along with the high-ranking members of the Ashford family, stood in small, murmuring clusters. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Today was the day Gabriel was expected to publicly acknowledge the alliance with the Ashfords, and everyone knew what that meant. He would have to accept Victoria Ashford's public courtship. Victoria stood near the grand fireplace, draped in a blood-red designer dress, looking like a triumphant queen. She held a flute of morning champagne, sneering at the staff who were rushing around, setting up the breakfast buffet. In the back, trying to remain invisible, was Penelope. She had slept for exactly 4 hours. Her hands were bandaged, a small mercy she had allowed herself, but her heart was in her throat. She had tried to hide in the kitchen, but Abigail had practically dragged her upstairs by the ear. One of the catering carts had broken down, and they needed Penelope's sheer physical strength to push the heavy replacement cart into the main hall. "Keep your head down, you stupid cow," Abigail hissed as she shoved Penelope toward the double doors. "Push the cart, serve the coffee, and get out before you ruin everyone's appetite." Penelope gritted her teeth, tears prickling her eyes, and pushed the heavy silver cart into the crowded room. She kept her eyes on the floor, terrified of making eye contact with any of the terrifying men in tailored suits. Suddenly her cart hit a snag in the Persian rug. Penelope pushed harder, but her foot slipped. She stumbled, her heavy frame colliding hard with someone standing nearby. A sharp, piercing shriek echoed through the hall. The entire room went dead silent. Penelope scrambled to her feet, her blood running cold. She had bumped into Victoria Ashford. A splash of hot black coffee was slowly seeping into the fabric of Victoria's expensive red dress. "You clumsy, fat, disgusting pig!" Victoria screamed, her face contorting with rage. She raised her hand and delivered a stinging slap across Penelope's cheek. The sound cracked like a whip. Penelope stumbled back, clutching her face, a sob escaping her lips. "Who let this absolute whale out of the basement?" Victoria demanded, turning to the silent room seeking validation. "Is this the standard of the Hayes estate, hiring massive, incompetent livestock to serve us?" Abigail rushed forward, pale as a ghost. "Miss Ashford, I am so sorry I told her to stay out of sight. She is being fired immediately. I will have her thrown out." "You'll have her scrub this floor with her tongue before she leaves," Victoria spat. Penelope dropped to her knees, shaking uncontrollably, trying to gather the shattered porcelain cups with her bandaged hands. "This is it," she thought. "I'm done. My mother is going to be evicted. Get up, Penelope. The voice sliced through the room like a katana blade. The crowd parted instantly. Gabriel Hayes walked down the grand staircase. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his face a mask of absolute terrifying fury. But the fury wasn't directed at Penelope. He walked straight past the trembling Abigail. He ignored Victoria Ashford completely. He stopped in front of Penelope, reached down, and gently grasped her arms, pulling her up from the floor. "Mr. Hayes, I am so sorry," Penelope sobbed, trying to pull away. "Please don't hurt me. I'll pay for the dress. Quiet," Gabriel commanded softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pristine white silk handkerchief, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The entire syndicate watched in breathless shock. The ruthless Oyabun, the man who had supposedly ordered a hit on 3 rival bosses without blinking, was tenderly wiping the face of a weeping, overweight maid. Victoria Ashford's face turned purple. "Gabriel, are you ignoring me? This creature ruined my dress." Gabriel finally turned his head. His eyes were dead, devoid of any warmth. "Victoria," he said, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "You are a guest in my home, and you just laid your hands on the woman I intend to marry." A collective gasp echoed through the cavernous hall. Penelope stopped crying. She stopped breathing. She stared at Gabriel, sure she had lost her mind. "Marry." Victoria stammered, the color draining from her face. "You're joking. You're trying to insult my father by—" "I do not joke," Gabriel said. He turned back to Penelope. Before anyone could blink, he reached into his breast pocket. He produced a small velvet box. He flipped it open. Inside rested a blindingly brilliant Cartier Destiné diamond ring, a piece easily worth $3 million. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't need to. In front of 50 deadly gangsters, European cartel royalty, and the cruel staff that had tormented her, the most powerful man in the Pacific Rim took Penelope's bruised, bandaged hand. "You don't need to wash dishes anymore, Penny," Gabriel said loud enough for the entire room to hear. And with that, he slid the massive diamond onto her soapy, trembling finger. For 10 agonizing seconds, the grand foyer of the Medina estate was a graveyard of silence. The only sound was the jagged, ragged breathing of Victoria Ashford, whose face had twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The heavy Cartier diamond caught the morning light, casting fractured rainbows across the lapel of Gabriel's charcoal suit. Penelope stood frozen, her mind violently rejecting reality. The ring was so heavy on her finger, it felt like a shackle. She looked from the blinding jewel to Gabriel's impassive, chiseled face, waiting for the punchline. There was no punchline. "This is an outrage." The booming, gravelly voice of Reginald Ashford shattered the quiet. The patriarch of the European cartel stepped forward, his silver-tipped cane striking the marble floor like a judge's gavel. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed men who instinctively reached inside their tailored jackets. Instantly, Gabriel's own men, led by his ruthless underboss, Sullivan Reed, drew their weapons. The click of 30 safeties disengaging echoed through the hall like a swarm of mechanical locusts. "You insult my daughter, Gabriel." Reginald sneered, his accent thick and aristocratic. "You insult our family. We came here to merge our empires. We offered you the European ports, and you spit in our faces by proposing to a domestic servant, a fat, unremarkable peasant who washes your floors." Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't even look at Reginald. His dark eyes remained fixed on Victoria's ruined red dress. "I offered you a business alliance, Reginald," Gabriel said, his voice deadly quiet. "You tried to force a dynasty. I do not take a wife for political leverage. I take a wife because I choose to. Penelope is my choice. If the Ashford family finds my personal affairs insulting, you know where the gates are. You are making a fatal mistake." "Hayes," Victoria hissed, stepping closer, her eyes darting to Penelope with murderous intent. You think you can survive the West Coast without our backing? You think this pig can stand beside you when the streets run with blood? Sullivan, Gabriel said softly, finally looking up. Yes, boss, Sullivan Reed replied, his gun aimed squarely at Reginald's chest. Escort the Ashfords off my property. If they resist, leave them on the lawn. Gabriel turned to the horrified head housekeeper, who was practically hyperventilating in the corner. Abigail, pack your things. You have exactly 10 minutes to leave the premises before I have my men drag you out by your hair. Without another word, Gabriel wrapped his massive, heavily tattooed hand around Penelope's waist. He didn't pull her. He guided her, acting as an impenetrable shield between her trembling body and the venomous stares of the room. He led her up the grand staircase, away from the screaming and the drawing of guns down a long, mahogany-panelled corridor, and into his private study. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, plunging the room into a deep, insulated quiet. The study smelled of old paper leather and rain. A massive, genuine Mark Rothko painting hung on the far wall in violent strokes of crimson and black. The moment they were alone, Penelope's knees gave out. Gabriel caught her instantly, his strong arms wrapping around her thick waist, lifting her effortlessly as he deposited her onto a plush leather sofa. Penelope was hyperventilating her chest, heaving tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. Breathe, Penelope. Gabriel commanded, softly, pouring a glass of water from a crystal decanter and pressing it into her trembling hands. Deep breaths. You, she gasped, spilling water onto her apron. Are you insane? They're going to kill you. They're going to kill me. I'm just a maid. Why did you do that? Take it back. She frantically tried to pull the massive diamond off her finger, but her knuckles were so swollen from the hot water and scrubbing that the ring wouldn't budge. Panic seized her throat. Oh my God, it's stuck! It's stuck! Gabriel sat on the heavy oak coffee table directly in front of her. He gently but firmly grabbed her wrists, stopping her frantic pulling. Leave it, he said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. It stays on. Why, she sobbed completely, forgetting she was talking to a Mafia kingpin. I am a nobody. I am fat, I am broke, and I am exhausted. Why would you humiliate me like this? Was it just a prop to anger them? Because if it was, you've signed my death warrant. I didn't do this to humiliate you, Gabriel said, his tone shifting into something intensely serious, almost clinical. I did it to save my empire, and to save you. Penelope stared at him, the tears freezing on her cheeks. What? Gabriel leaned back, running a hand through his dark hair. The Ashfords didn't come here to merge with me, Penelope. They came to swallow my organization whole. Victoria was supposed to marry me, plant her father's loyalists in my ranks, and within a year I would have been poisoned or shot in my sleep. I needed a wife immediately to make me legally and socially unavailable. A wife they could not manipulate. So you picked the fat dishwasher you met at 3 a.m, she asked, her voice cracking with disbelief and a deep, aching insecurity. I picked the woman who showed more grit-scrubbing pans at 3 a.m. than Victoria Ashford has shown in her entire life, Gabriel corrected sharply. He leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave. But I do not make blind bets, Penelope. After I sent you to bed last night, I made a few phone calls. I know who you are. Penelope's heart dropped into her stomach. You looked into me. I know that your father abandoned you when you were 7. Gabriel recited, his eyes tracking every flicker of emotion on her face. I know that you worked 3 jobs to put yourself through a community college accounting program. And I know that your mother, Martha Jenkins, was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. I know she resides at the Aegis Living Memory Care Facility in Bellevue, and that you are exactly 2 weeks away from defaulting on the $10,000 monthly payments." Penelope covered her mouth, a fresh sob tearing through her chest. It was her deepest, darkest secret. The crushing weight of her mother's illness was the only reason she endured Abigail's abuse, the only reason she ruined her hands in the scalding water night after night. "Here is my offer," Gabriel said, his voice softening just a fraction. "You wear that ring. You stand by my side. You act as the future matriarch of this syndicate. In exchange, you will never touch another dirty plate as long as you live. Furthermore, I have already wired $5 million to a private trust in your mother's name. Aegis Living is paid in full for the rest of her natural life, with round-the-clock private specialists." Penelope stopped breathing. $5 million. Her mother was safe. The agonizing, sleepless nights, wondering if her mother would be thrown out onto the street, were instantly vaporized. You already paid it," she whispered. "I protect what is mine," Gabriel stated simply. "And as of right now, you are mine. The Ashfords will come for us. They will try to find a weakness in this arrangement. They will mock your weight, your background, your lack of pedigree. They want you to break. I need to know if you have the strength to stand tall." Penelope looked down at the massive diamond on her finger. She thought of Victoria's stinging slap. She thought of Abigail's cruel sneers. For her entire life, she had made herself small, so others could feel big. She had apologized for taking up space. She looked up at Gabriel, her hazel eyes hardening with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. "I want Abigail's severance pay revoked." Gabriel's lips twitched into the faintest ghost of a smile. "Done. And I need a new wardrobe," Penelope added, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "If I am going to war with European cartel royalty, I refuse to do it in an apron." 72 hours later, the Medina estate was a fortress bracing for a siege. Sullivan Reed had doubled the perimeter guards, bringing in ex-military contractors to patrol the lakeside docks. The Ashford family had retreated to a penthouse in downtown Seattle, licking their wounds and plotting their retaliation. Inside the mansion, a very different kind of battle was taking place in the newly renovated East Wing Master Suite. Gabriel had flown in Madeleine Dupont, one of the most exclusive private couturiers from Paris, to design Penelope's wardrobe for the upcoming Syndicate Winter Gala, a public event where Gabriel would officially present Penelope to the rest of the underworld bosses. Penelope stood in front of a massive three-way gilded mirror. The bruises on her hands were healing, softening beneath expensive moisturizers, but her anxiety was at an all-time high. Madeleine, a severe-looking woman with a tape measure draped like a snake around her neck, was dramatically sighing as she pulled a massive, shapeless swath of beige chiffon over Penelope's head. "We must use the draping technique, mademoiselle," Madeleine instructed in a clipped tone, pinning the fabric so it completely swallowed Penelope's curves. "Dark colors, heavy fabrics. We must create the illusion of a smaller silhouette. We must hide the excess. Mr. Hayes expects elegance, not a spectacle." Penelope stared at her reflection. She looked like a beige tent. She felt exactly like the fat, invisible maid they all wanted her to be. A heavy lump of shame formed in her throat. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe she was just a pig in a palace. The heavy double door swung open. Gabriel walked in, accompanied by Sullivan. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the beige monstrosity swallowing his fiancée. "What is this?" Gabriel demanded, his voice chilling the room. Madeleine smiled nervously. "Ah, Mr. Hayes, I am utilizing a classic Parisian technique to minimize the young lady's proportions. It is essential to camouflage the hips and the bust, so she doesn't draw the wrong kind of attention at the gala." Gabriel walked slowly toward the mirror. He stopped right behind Penelope. He didn't look at the designer. He looked into Penelope's eyes through the reflection. He saw the shame pooling there, and it ignited a white-hot fury in his chest. "Take it off," Gabriel ordered. Monsieur Madeleine balked. "Take this hideous rag off of her right now," Gabriel snarled, turning his terrifying gaze onto the designer. "I did not hire you to hide my future wife in a potato sack. I did not ask you to make her smaller. I chose her exactly as she is." He stepped closer to Penelope, his large hands resting firmly on her wide, soft hips. Penelope gasped softly at the contact, a shiver running down her spine. "She has curves. She has weight." Gabriel said his voice, a low, commanding rumble that made Sullivan step back toward the door in silent respect. "You will design a dress that worships every inch of her. I want deep emerald silk. I want a custom corset that lifts her bust and cinches her waist. I want a slit that shows off her thighs. She is a queen, Madeleine, not a secret to be hidden in the dark. If you cannot do this, I will find someone who can, and you will never work in this industry again." Madeleine swallowed hard, her face pale. Yes, Monsieur Hayes. Emerald silk. Emphasize the curves. Right away." As the designer scrambled to gather new fabrics, Gabriel leaned down his lips, brushing the shell of Penelope's ear. "Do not ever let them make you feel small," he whispered fiercely. "You are the Lady of Medina now. Own your space." Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at her reflection, then at the dangerous, beautiful man standing behind her. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to hide. Later that afternoon, while the designers frantically sewed, Penelope decided she needed a break from the suffocating luxury. Old habits died hard, and she found herself wandering down the familiar back corridors toward the underground kitchen. The kitchen staff froze when she walked in. They stared at the massive diamond on her finger and her expensive cashmere sweater. 2 days ago they had mocked her. Now they looked at her with sheer terror. "As you were," Penelope said softly, trying to ease the tension. She walked over to the massive walk-in pantry, inhaling the familiar scents of garlic-cured meats and fresh produce. It was the only place in the house that made sense to her. As she browsed the shelves, her eyes fell on a clipboard hanging near the delivery bay doors. It was the weekly invoice log from Providence Foods, their primary front company for restaurant supplies. Penelope, who had spent 3 years studying accounting before her mother got sick, instinctively flipped through the pages. The numbers leapt out at her. She frowned. She traced a manicured finger down the column of an invoice dated that morning. 300 crates of premium extra virgin olive oil. Total weight 6,000 pounds. Penelope's brow furrowed. She knew the kitchen logistics better than the head chef. They didn't use extra virgin olive oil from Providence. They exclusively imported cold-pressed oil from a private grove in Tuscany. Furthermore, 6,000 pounds of liquid was impossible for the small delivery vans logged at the gate that morning. The numbers didn't match the weight didn't match the volume. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. Someone had authorized a ghost shipment, and they had bypassed security by routing it through the kitchen's back-end logistics. Clutching the clipboard to her chest, Penelope practically sprinted out of the kitchen, her heavy footsteps echoing down the marble halls. She bypassed the guards at Gabriel's study, ignoring their protests, and threw the heavy oak doors open. Gabriel was standing over a map of the city, with Sullivan Reed mapping out Ashford territory. Both men snapped their heads up as she burst in, panting heavily. "Penelope," Gabriel asked, instantly moving toward her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "What's wrong?" "The kitchen," she gasped out, slamming the clipboard onto his mahogany desk. "You have a rat, Gabriel. Someone on the inside is smuggling something into the estate. Today." Sullivan scowled. "With all due respect, Ms. Jenkins, I oversee all security logs. Nothing gets past the gates without my boys searching it. Everything logged today was just food and wine." "No, it wasn't," Penelope said, her voice steadying as her accounting brain took over. She pointed to the ledger. "Look at this. 300 crates of olive oil from Providence Foods. But look at the gross tonnage. Olive oil has a specific density. If this was really oil, the weight on the weigh station stamp would be 30% lighter. Whatever came in those crates is heavy, like metal, like weapons." And it was signed off by... She traced the signature at the bottom. It was a sloppy scrawl, but she recognized the initials. "Marcus," she breathed. Marcus was one of the estate's senior quartermasters. Gabriel's face turned into a mask of pure ice. He looked at the numbers, instantly understanding the math Penelope had just broken down. The Ashfords hadn't left Seattle to lick their wounds. They had bought off his quartermaster to smuggle a strike force's worth of weapons into the estate through the food delivery bay. Gabriel looked from the clipboard to Penelope. The awe in his eyes was unmistakable. He hadn't just bought a pawn to block a marriage. He had accidentally acquired a brilliant strategist. "Sullivan," Gabriel said, his voice deadly calm. "Yes, boss. Lock down the estate, nobody in or out, and bring Marcus to the basement. It seems my future wife has just saved our lives." The damp, soundproofed sub-level of the Medina estate was a place few entered, and even fewer left. Within 20 minutes of Penelope's discovery, the entire compound was on total lockdown. Steel shutters deployed over the floor-to-ceiling windows, and heavily armed guards systematically swept the 50-acre property. Down in the concrete-lined interrogation room, the corrupt quartermaster was violently shoved into a steel chair by Sullivan Reed. Gabriel stood in the corner, his suit jacket discarded, his crisp white shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows, exposing the twisting dragons of his Yakuza ink. He didn't yell. He didn't strike the man. He simply placed the Providence Foods invoice on the metal table, tapping the fraudulent signature with one perfectly manicured finger. 300 crates, Gabriel murmured, his voice a lethal silken thread, hidden beneath a false layer of Kalamata olives and imported oil. "We opened them, Dawson. Do you want to know what we found?" The quartermaster, sweating profusely and shaking like a leaf, squeezed his eyes shut. "Boss, please. They threatened my family in Portland. The Ashfords. They said if I didn't sign off on the delivery bay transfer, they would burn my house down with my kids inside. We found enough high-grade C4 explosives and unserialized FNP-90 submachine guns to level this entire estate." Gabriel continued, completely ignoring the man's pleas. "The Ashfords were not planning a hit, Dawson. They were planning a massacre. They intended to arm their loyalists during the Winter Gala tomorrow night and execute my entire inner circle while we drank champagne." Gabriel leaned in, his dark eyes devoid of all mercy. "You let the wolf into my house. You endangered my men. And most unforgivably, you endangered my fiancé." Sullivan drew his weapon, the metallic click echoing loudly in the sterile room. "Wait," the quartermaster sobbed, falling to his knees. "I can give you their timeline. I can tell you exactly how Reginald Ashford plans to trigger the ambush at the gala. Please, Mr. Hayes, let me be of use." Gabriel raised a single hand, halting Sullivan. A dark, terrifying smile curved the edges of the syndicate boss's lips. The Ashfords thought they had planted a fatal trap. They had no idea Gabriel was now holding the detonator. Upstairs, blissfully isolated from the brutality of the basement, Penelope sat in the Grand Master Suite. Her heart was racing. She had spent the last 2 hours pacing the Persian rugs, the reality of her new life crashing over her in suffocating waves. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She had just intercepted a cartel arms shipment. She had painted a target on her own back. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Gabriel stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He looked exhausted. There was a faint smudge of grease on his forearm, and his knuckles were slightly bruised, but his eyes softened the moment they landed on her. Penelope shrank back slightly, her hands nervously smoothing down her cashmere sweater. Is it handled because of you, yes?" Gabriel said, walking slowly toward her. He stopped a few feet away, seemingly hyper-aware of the space between them. We secured the weapons. The Ashfords' inside men have been quietly neutralized. Tomorrow night, Reginald and Victoria will walk into the Winter Gala, believing they hold all the cards. They will find out exactly how wrong they are. Penelope swallowed the lump in her throat. What happens to me during the gala, I mean? Should I hide in the suite? Gabriel stepped closer, gently taking her soft, plump hands in his. He traced the Cartier diamond on her finger. You do not hide, Penelope. Ever again. Tomorrow night you will stand beside me. You will look them in the eye, and you will let them know that the Lady of Medina cannot be broken. Gabriel, I am terrified. She whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. I don't know how to be a Mafia queen. I don't know how to navigate these people. I am just me. I am heavy. I am awkward. I scrubbed these floors yesterday. Victoria is going to humiliate me in front of the entire Pacific Rim underworld. Gabriel reached up his rough thumbs, gently wiping the tear from her skin. Victoria Ashford is a ghost, Penelope. She is a relic of an old world that I am about to tear down. You are the reality. You are brilliant, you are fiercely protective, and you are breathtaking. Tomorrow you will wear your curves like armor, and I will burn anyone who disrespects you. The sincerity in his voice was a physical force. For the first time, looking into the eyes of a man feared by thousands, Penelope felt entirely, completely safe. The next evening, the Medina estate was transformed into a glittering fortress of wealth and power. The Syndicate Winter Gala was the premier event for the underworld elite. Black town cars and armored Maybachs lined the driveway. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over ice sculptures carved to resemble soaring eagles. Waiters carrying trays of crystal champagne and beluga caviar weaved through the crowd. Among the attendees were tech billionaires from Bellevue who laundered the syndicate's money, Russian Bratva lieutenants seeking favorable shipping rates through the port of Seattle, and the highest-ranking capos of Gabriel's empire. And standing near the grand fireplace, looking sickeningly triumphant, were Reginald and Victoria Ashford. Victoria wore a slinky silver gown that clung to her emaciated frame, her eyes darting toward the ballroom doors, waiting for her father's secret strike force to make their move. "Enjoy the champagne, gentlemen," she sneered quietly to a group of Gabriel's lieutenants. "The management is about to change." Suddenly the string quartet ceased playing. The heavy mahogany doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The ballroom fell into a deafening silence. At the top of the stairs stood Gabriel Hayes, wearing a midnight blue velvet tuxedo that accentuated his broad, lethal frame. But nobody was looking at the terrifying Oyabun. Every eye in the room was locked onto the woman standing beside him. Penelope was a vision. Madeleine, the Parisian designer, had followed Gabriel's instructions to the letter. The custom emerald silk gown was a masterpiece of engineering and art. The heavy corsetry cinched Penelope's waist dramatically, lifting her full bust and creating a spectacular hourglass silhouette that celebrated her size rather than hiding it. The rich green fabric draped elegantly over her wide hips with a daring slit up the thigh that revealed a tantalizing flash of skin and a pair of custom Christian Louboutin heels. Her thick brown hair was swept up into an intricate tumbling updo woven with actual diamond pins. She did not look like a maid. She looked like a fertility goddess carved from precious jewels. She looked like absolute power. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. The Russian lieutenants practically dropped their glasses, their eyes wide with raw appreciation. In a world of starving plastic socialites, Penelope's lush, vibrant, heavy beauty was a shock to the system. Gabriel leaned in, kissing her cheek publicly. "Hold your head high," he murmured. "Let them worship you." With Gabriel's hand resting firmly on the small of her back, Penelope descended the grand staircase. She felt the silk brushing against her legs. She felt the heavy diamond on her finger. She channeled every ounce of pain, every cruel word Abigail had ever spoken to her, and turned it into fuel. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead. As Gabriel and Penelope reached the ballroom floor, the crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Men bowed their heads in deep respect. Women stared in thinly veiled envy. Victoria Ashford's face was completely drained of colour. She stared at Penelope, her jaw unhinged, unable to comprehend the transformation. The fat, incompetent livestock she had slapped 2 days ago was now commanding the absolute reverence of the most dangerous men on the West Coast. "This is a farce," Reginald Ashford growled, slamming his cane into the marble floor as Gabriel and Penelope approached their circle. "You parade this oversized servant around as if she is royalty, Gabriel. You make a mockery of our traditions." Gabriel smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that made the temperature in the room plummet. "Traditions change, Reginald. The strong survive. The blind perish." Reginald sneered, pulling out a gold pocket watch and checking the time. It was exactly 10 p.m. "Speaking of survival, Gabriel, I believe it is time we renegotiate our terms. On my terms." Reginald snapped his fingers loudly, the prearranged signal for his embedded loyalists and the corrupted quartermaster's men to flood the ballroom with the smuggled P-90 submachine guns. Victoria stepped forward, a vicious smirk twisting her heavily made-up face. "You should have married me, Gabriel. Now your little fat pig gets to watch you bleed out on your own floor." 10 seconds passed. The string quartet softly tuned their instruments in the corner. Guests continued to sip their champagne. No armed men stormed the doors. No guns were drawn. Nothing happened. Reginald frowned, his aristocratic composure slipping. He snapped his fingers again, harder. "I said it is time." He barked toward the shadows of the corridor. "If you are waiting for Dawson and your strike team, Reginald, you are going to be waiting a very long time." A voice boomed from the balcony. The crowd looked up. Sullivan Reed stood on the overlooking landing, holding an assault rifle casually across his chest. Behind him, stacked like firewood, were the 300 crates of olive oil the Ashfords had tried to smuggle. Surrounding the ballroom perimeter, dozens of Gabriel's loyal guards simultaneously stepped out from behind the velvet curtains, their weapons leveled directly at Reginald, Victoria, and their small 6-man entourage. The trap had snapped shut, but the Ashfords were the ones caught inside it. What is this?" Reginald stammered, the realization hitting him like a freight train. He looked frantically at Gabriel. "How did you—" "You made a fatal miscalculation," Gabriel interrupted, his voice echoing through the silent, terrified ballroom. "You thought you were dealing with a foolish man blinded by a pretty face. But my fiancée is not just beautiful. She is the one who audited your ghost shipment. She is the one who found your explosives. A maid from the basement outsmarted the great Ashford cartel." The entire room turned to look at Penelope. The murmurs of awe grew louder. She wasn't just a trophy, she was a tactical asset. Victoria screamed in pure frustration, losing her mind. She lunged forward, raising her hand to strike Penelope, just as she had done in the foyer days before. "You ruined everything, you fat bitch!" Gabriel moved to intercept, but he didn't need to. Penelope stepped forward, planting her high heels firmly on the marble. With a speed and strength honed by years of grueling manual labor, Penelope caught Victoria's wrist mid-swing. The loud smack of flesh meeting flesh echoed in the room. Victoria gasped, trying to pull away, but Penelope's grip was like an iron vice. "Do not ever attempt to touch me again," Penelope said, her voice dropping an octave, radiating a quiet, terrifying authority that perfectly mirrored Gabriel's. "You came into my home. You insulted my weight. You threatened my husband, and you thought you could take what belongs to us." Penelope released Victoria's wrist, shoving her backward so hard. The heiress stumbled and fell ungracefully onto the polished floor, her silver dress riding up her spindly legs. "I am the Lady of Medina," Penelope declared, looking down at the pathetic, trembling woman. "And you are no longer welcome on my property." The ballroom erupted. Not in chaos, but in applause. The Russian lieutenants were the first to clap, roaring their approval for the heavy-set, fierce woman who had just publicly humiliated the European cartel. Sullivan Reed smirked from the balcony. Gabriel's men lowered their weapons, the tension breaking into victorious cheers. Reginald Ashford, seeing his empire crumble in the span of 3 minutes, dropped his cane. "Gabriel, please, we can negotiate. The European ports belong to me now," Gabriel stated coldly. "Sullivan, escort the Ashfords to Boeing Field. Put them on their private jet. If they ever enter North American airspace, again shoot them out of the sky." Guards immediately seized Reginald and hauled a screaming Victoria up from the floor, dragging them out of the grand ballroom in absolute disgrace. The threat was neutralized. The coup was crushed. Gabriel turned to Penelope. The music swelled back to life, the quartet playing a sweeping, triumphant waltz. He looked at her flushed cheeks, her heaving chest, and the blazing fire in her hazel eyes. "I believe," Gabriel whispered, wrapping his arms around her lush waist and pulling her flush against his solid chest. "I owe you a dance, Mrs. Hayes." "I don't know how to waltz." Penelope breathed, her hands resting nervously on his broad shoulders. "Then I will teach you," he replied. "Just as you taught me how to see." He didn't care about the hundreds of people watching. He didn't care about the syndicates, the money, or the power. Gabriel Hayes dipped his curvy, beautiful bride backward, capturing her lips in a deep, bruising, passionate kiss that sealed their alliance and their hearts forever. Penelope melted into him, returning the kiss with everything she had. She was Penelope Jenkins, the fat dishwasher who worked at 3 a.m. to save her dying mother. And she was Penelope Hayes, the undisputed, brilliant queen of the Pacific Rim underworld. She had stopped apologizing for taking up space, because from now on she owned the entire room. Did you love this thrilling journey of Penelope and Gabriel, from a midnight dishwasher to the undisputed, brilliant queen of the underworld? Penelope proved that true power and beauty come in all shapes and sizes. If you enjoyed this high-stakes Mafia, romance drama filled with twists, revenge, and explosive passion, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a fierce, curvy heroine, and subscribe to our video channel for more intense, real-life, inspired storytelling. Drop a comment below on what you want to see next.